And we're live. Hello, everybody. It is Thursday. It's time for our weekly Anchore OSS gardening session. I'm Dan, and today on the session we've got Keith, we've got Chris, we've got Will, we've got Alex. We are the open source software team at Anchore, and generally we work on open source tools that inspect and analyze software in a variety of forms for insight, security, and compliance purposes. This session is an opportunity for us to go through different types of issues and tickets and discussion topics from GitHub, really dig into some stuff. Sometimes we talk about bugs, sometimes we talk about features, sometimes we talk about open topics that are kind of interesting to really dig into with the technical team here. So we'll get into it now. Welcome, everyone. So we're going to start with our regular agenda with tickets that are tagged needs discussion. That's what's up on the screen here right now. So I thought we could, this time, we'll start at the top and start working our way down. Let's go. First one is, what do we got? This is Grype 2289. Looks like a false positive. Let's take a look at this stuff.
Yep. I think I might have been the one that added this to a needs discussion just because it was a little different than a lot of the false positives that we see when it comes to SLES and Python. This one, it looks like it's caused by a change in versioning scheme from year-based to Semver. If we look here, there's a keystone. It's got, fixed in 2012.1, but the version is 18, right? So like at some point, somebody switched the versioning scheme there. And I was just kind of wondering if is there anybody that we know of who's kind of gone from a year-based versioning scheme or gone from Semver to a year-based versioning scheme? I would think it's pretty much always the other way around. And I wonder if there's some kind of intelligent default we might be able to see if we're like, oh, this is this really looks like a year-based versioning scheme, versus not, or something like that. That was really the only question.
My super naive brain goes to check for 4 digits in the front major version. If it's 4 digits, it might be a yearly scheme. I don't know, anecdotally, I don't know many projects that have gotten to the thousands of major versions. There might be one there, but I feel like we're pretty, the overlapping circles don't really intersect in that case.
Right. I think what we're guessing is not is this a date-based or Semver-based thing? I think, the presence of a year is a pretty good indication that it's date-based. I think that the question Grype has to guess is, did this project switch from dates to Semver or Semver to dates? Right? In other words, 1.2.3 and 2025 10.2 are not comparable, but which is later? And so I think that's what Keith was saying is maybe we just assume that people switch from Semver to years. I wonder though, because people could switch the other way. I wonder if I can see why you said this was related to epochs, Keith. So in D packages and RPMs, version numbers start with 0 colon or 1 colon, and that's a versioning epoch. And so if you do something where you're I want to switch from years to major minor patch or whatever, you increment the epoch, and it's basically everything that starts with 0 colon is less than everything that starts with 1 colon. It's a way of saying I sort of broke compatibility in how I version, or I versioned the version scheme. And I think it would be interesting if we could try to put I wonder if we could look at PyPy data and say oh, look, we've got just looking at Keystone on pypy.org right now, they released 28.0.0 yesterday, and then it still looks Semvery going back to mid 2018, and I don't see the next page button. So it seems in this case, if we did a sample of the versions from like ecosystem.ms or like from pypi.org or something, we could put our own epochs in the data, and that might be kind of interesting. Or do something like that. Like we could have a flag on the package, like in Grype's database, that means semvers are greater than dates, or dates are greater than semvers. That would be a whole lot more work than just guessing. It'd be interesting to try to build a scraper and see like which order people switch in. Um,
The other
but
thing we could potentially do is, there was another thing that we've been talking about, which is related to the, like Will said, the epochs. But if we did have a way of putting some data in the database, maybe we could say, oh, well, this package, switched on version X, the old versioning scheme ended at some other version or something. I was kind of wondering, like, what would that even be? Because, like, one of the things we looked up was Git. And I think the versions that we saw, it was something along like 4.2. And then, like, Git today is only at like 2 point something, right? But, like, potentially in the future, they could hit a 4.2 again, right? And what do they do? Like, do they just release the same version again? I don't know if, like what they would do.
yeah, well, and I think what we were looking at, and this is actually an even it is like whose version with like a well-known project, a very old project like Git. It's like there could be like version control tags in the repo. There could be like what version Debian says it is. I think that was one of the things we saw, is that like the D package for Git spans like 5 epochs or something. Like there's 5 different versioning schemes used by Debian to describe what version Git is, but I don't even know if any of them are used by the upstream project. Um, and so I think the important thing to do is to make sure that the person, like, or that the entity sort of ordering versions and the entity labeling vulnerability fix ranges agree. It doesn't really matter. Like there's not really a true version. I just want to know, like, oh, this is a D package. Well, let's see what Debian thinks it is.
Right.
Um,
But I think that's what's like kind of bothering me, because I was imagining like all the things we could add to the database, and I realized it doesn't matter how many things we add to the database. It's still a left-hand, right-hand side comparison issue where like everything we've been talking about is like the right-hand side, the vuln side, and there's still this, the package comes in the left uh, for comparison, and we don't have something that says what it is. So no matter what we do on the right, we're always going to have a heuristic on the left that says, well, this looks like it could be like schema version X versus Y.
Right.
And so it makes me want to like kind of ignore anything we could put in the database for that because of the extra complexity, and to say like, well, if we focus on the heuristic, then like how far can we get along that path? Meaning the heuristic of looking at just the package version itself and trying to understand what scheme it is. And if we can classify that, we can then compare it to today's we have that version format that's there today. And so we say like, oh, a detected year, but this says semver explicitly from the database, which is there now. Like we kind of immediately know this is not comparable. We shouldn't compare. But I don't think that would be the final answer. I think that would be like the first increment, and some of these other increments would probably look like some of these other suggestions that you guys have said.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Is it worth talking a little bit about what Grype does today in terms of version comparison, just for context? So
Yeah.
basically, Grype has like a version comparator per package type. So we have like code that compares RPM versions, and code that compares depackage versions, and code that compares PyPy versions. And that one's special because like PEP 440 is all about different ways of versioning Python packages. And we did quite a bit of extra work to make sure that like Python packages get compared according to that spec. Um, but and so and then we have sort of a fallback where if either on the vulnerability side or on the package side, um, we can't figure it out. We're like, okay, this doesn't look like an RPM version. This doesn't look like Semver. This doesn't look like a valid Go package version. We fall back to what's called fuzzy comparison, which basically just tries to guess. It does things like split on periods and compare it parsing. And I think at the end of the day, the like final fallback is just to string sort the two versions, which is not good. It's just guessing, but we have to do something. And we don't want to just throw out the vulnerability. And that becomes weird. I think the assumption that's built into that is that, yeah, these are all our special version comparators. But the assumption that's built into that is sort of that the comparand, like both comparands are the same, right? That like it's a PyPy package and it's a GHSA about a PyPy package. So the version formats are the same. And I wonder if we need, it sounds like Alex, maybe you're suggesting being smarter about that. Like what happens if I have a date looking PEP 440 PyPy version and a Semver looking PEP 440 PyPy version? Like right now what happens is they both regex to Semver because they're both digit period,
Yeah.
digit. And then, but they're not really, like a human wouldn't think it was Semver. It's only the /D plus that thinks it's Semver. So maybe we should do something smarter there. And then it would be a whole lot easier to update that regex and have like a fallback than it would be to go crawl all of PyPy and like list versions in order or something.
Right. I mean, I think I think we really could do, constrain it beyond just regex. Like, hey, if the four numbers in the major version are between like, 1990 and like 2040, I don't know what our, millennium's going to be for this, that we choose, but like, and the other fields are, within 1 to 12 or like 1 to 31, like that kind of thing. Because, then you have a pretty high probability. And then you could take this whole heuristic, because it is still a guess, it's heuristic, and just put that behind a configurable. Because some folks are going to say, please never make this guess. And that's okay. Like,
Right.
But I think we'd have it on by default, put it behind a configurable and say, this heuristic works pretty well.
Right. Yeah. Okay, that's a cool idea. It's just to say like, okay, we have like an is probable date function in our version comparison, and we say like, okay, if either comparand is a probable date and the other, like if they're both probable dates, then we go down a path and say like, okay, which one is later? And if neither is neither's a probable date, we do what we do today. But if exactly one is a probable date, do we just assume the one that's Semver is later? I'm kind of inclined to, because I feel like
That's a tricky
there
part.
used to be a lot of variety in version schemes. Like if you look at like, dpackage and RPM are both very old package managers, and they have kind of bananas looking version schemes. Whereas if you look at something like Go or Rust that developed their version scheme much more recently, it's very Semver. And like we see this project, it used to be 2012 point stuff, and now it's like 1.2.3. So Semver seems to be on the rise. So I think assuming Semver is later than date-like and making that be a default behavior and having a flag to turn it off isn't a bad idea. But Keith has his hands up because he realized it's a bad idea.
No, I don't. I think that's a good idea, but we have date information about the vulnerabilities too, right? What if we use that, and the date that we're comparing it to precedes the date of the vulnerability with a version in it?
That's clever.
Then it would be pretty safe, I think, like for this heuristic to me, to say like, there's probably a change in the versioning scheme from a date-based version to the Semver that I'm looking at, that the database tells me is a Semver.
Yeah. So you're saying like I have a fixed version that's like 2012.11.9, and we have an updated date in the vulnerability metadata that's like in 2025. Like it's very, very likely. Is that the situation you're talking about?
I think flip that.
Yeah. Especially if we're talking about a fixed in, like if the fixed in version field is a date and the vulnerability date is much later. I think, that's information that could be used to influence the heuristic safely.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think you're right, Will. Like what we're looking at on the screen is, it looks like the fixed in is a year-based version. That's what we have in the database, and the version is a semver in the package that we scanned. And so we'll have both sides of that comparison in different, depending on what the case is. But this one is trickier because we have to assume that we have something newer than the package, than the year-based date here. So, but yeah, I think basically what you said, right?
Well, and I'll make the argument that assuming that most projects go from one scheme to the next, it's kind of a heuristic I think we're gonna probably lose on. So I like the idea of being used the vuln information date, because I would Will, for the flip side, I've actually seen projects they've kind of gone the other way where they've said, well, we had semver, but we went to year because we hated having to think about planning the next version. And if it's but we know we're going to release next, and they moved to that approach to simplify their release planning essentially.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense, and I think it's also the other place that this is going to get messed up is if people backport fixes. And I don't even know how you'd represent that with date-based versioning. I think that's a pretty good argument in favor of semver, as I can go back to, I can get checkout 1.2.3 and make some changes and push to 1.2.4, and, the 3.x tag can keep doing its thing. But I think, that's just something else to pay attention to. It's what if, and I think especially in very widely used projects, I forget what Java version we're up to, but people are backporting security fixes to Java 11, which is pretty old. So okay, so
we probably have a few things on this. We just gotta. It's more of writing it on the issue. I feel at this point. Does anyone want to take point on capturing notes? I mean, tell me if I'm lying, unless we got something else on this.
I'll try to take. I'll try to capture some notes and see what. But you're gonna have to help because I didn't quite understand the fixed date heuristic.
Yeah, we'll tag team.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say is this might be worth putting in the response. Look, if there was a data source that had, for open source projects, an epoch level or piece of information that says this project converted version schemes from X to Y, an epoch approach would be perfect, right? But that data source doesn't exist. Therefore, here's the discussion about our heuristics.
Yeah,
because I'd actually be really interested if anyone in the community has something to say about that type of data source.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thanks, guys.
And I think the other thing, because I think we've learned in the past, shipping that kind of data. We don't have this exact data source, but we've had the opportunity to ship package level information in the past, and the reason why we've never done it is because it's if we think shipping vuln data nightly is hard, shipping that package level data is so much more data.
Yep.
So it's just one of those then we're talking about we're running a data service as opposed to shipping a database for that kind of stuff, which isn't bad. It's not wrong. It's it'd be a thing, but I think in the past we've been mostly focused around static data sets. So that was the main challenge around that kind of stuff. But I agree, Dan. I echo the is there a data set out there that we've missed?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we would have potentially some vulnerability records that have some changes with date information. We could potentially ascertain some amount of that from
That's
the
right,
Grype database today.
Yep, exactly.
Oh no. So all I have to do is, I guess, okay, you're right. Oh, good. I only have to process one database though. I thought you were saying context. I had this suddenly a little panic where I'd have to process all the Grype databases again. We just did that. We had put in, we determined fixed dates from by looking at all the 5 years of Grype databases we published to see like when's the first time we observed a fix. We could do that because we still have them all, but it's like it took longer than I thought it was going to be to like process all of it. So Keith, when you mentioned that suggestion, I was like, oh no, we got to reprocess them all again for something. It's like, oh no, we just need one. Great, cool.
Yeah, this is just the last one.
Okay, well, it sounds like there's a good follow-up. Will and Alex, you'll respond back to this and decide if the needs discussion should still be on there, or like if it's a waiting for a response kind of status. But that sounds good. Yeah, we definitely dug in. This is a very interesting topic, and you know, I like the fact, Alex, you pinged this one over just to make the point, like it is shockingly complicated to do software version comparison. Like, look at all this code.
Right?
Right?
And you'll
There's
notice
quite a
in here
bit.
that like
Yep.
like the JVM has its own version comparator.
Yeah, in a way
And,
that's
like,
stable, right, and usable. So we're you know,
Yeah.
there's definitely exceptions, and that's partially what we're talking about with this particular ticket. But
Oh, come
Fascinating.
April 1st, I'm going to put in a PR that's going to be like, you know, a version scheme for version scheme for version schemes. It's going to be great. We're going to have a way
Yeah.
to be able to alter epochs and how they're
A-
versioned.
Yeah, AI meta epochs. That's going to be
Yeah.
the April Fool's feature launch.
No, we should
Uh,
just we should burn all of our tokens asking like impossible questions on epoch version comparisons to the AIs and just like see what they come up with. Just be like, hey, take these. You have no base reference at all. Just compare these two things. How would you do it? And they'd be like, well, when you take a cow and a chicken, and you're like, okay, we've gone off the deep end.
Could I request that since we just talked about epochs, the next one be the epoch one, which is Grype 2964. I think I've toggled the label a couple times, so I don't know if it's going to show up in,
oh, I can
in the
just,
list. But I think I've just put it back on.
2964. Let's check it out.
Yeah, just dropped it in the chat too.
Yeah.
This
So just to continue with that discussion, basically, this is what should happen when the epoch is missing. Like we get an SBOM piped into Grype and there's no epoch on the D packages or RPMs. Today, Grype just assumes the epoch is 0, which is spec compliant because that's what tools like RPM Dev Faircomp, which is a, you know, Red Hat Fedora tool for comparing the versions of RPMs, they do that. And it has the advantage that it never makes a false negative because 0 versions are always lower than anything else. So we're assuming the package is older than it is, if anything, but it does make a lot of false positives. And depending on the tool you use to make the SBOM or to get the package version, you really might not have an epoch. And we might like to handle that case better. So that's sort of some background on here.
Is there anything about the channel that the package came from for distro packages that might somehow influence what we know about the versions that the user might be getting? Does that make sense? Like, is there any
Like
sort of,
EUS, like that channel.
well, like EUS, or like the fact that it's, I don't know, Red Hat 8 versus Red Hat 9 or whatever.
No, it's because it's per package, not, and so like what I think what the distros are really saying is like the schema for reckoning versions of say Nginx changed, and now we have a new way, and so we're like saying like, okay, versions before this one aren't comparable to versions after, and I haven't found I think it depends more on the package. Like if upstream has decided to iterate a lot on their versioning scheme, that might be reflected in the epoch for the distro package. But I haven't found something like rel 8 packages usually are epoch 1. If that's the sort of rule you're at, I haven't found much like that that's any help.
I mean, the only reason why I linked this one here is tangentially related, is that epochs have just been this philosophical debate for like a long time. Feels like, so I remember like when we changed this in the code base probably 3 or 4 times. This is like after like Anchor engine, I'm certain I've changed a few times. And then but in order to research this, like for, looking up on these forums for Red Hat and others, folks just arguing back and forth about like when an epoch's missing, what does it really mean? What can you do with it? There's a long history here.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, and I feel like that it's kind of a frustrating discussion. Like my first instinct when the issue came up was to be like, why do you want to put in a switch that makes us be wrong about version comparisons? An unspecified epoch is 0. But I think some people were saying like it can be tricky to get, like, if you ask RPM what's installed, you don't necessarily get epochs on the command line or whatever.
Yeah.
Even if the epoch is in truth non-zero, and that kind of thing is a very good reason to, I think, have configurable behavior on missing epoch.
Yeah, there's definitely an interesting thing here to realize is that if you use Syft generated SBOMs, you won't encounter this problem. This is purely a case where you're using some other way of getting information into a format that Grype can understand. And with these particular types of missing pieces of information, it can drastically affect the accuracy of the results, right? So this is essentially saying information was lost, but we still want to do an aggressive and conservative scan with the tool. So there is an acknowledgement that by not having this information, it will be less accurate. The result you get back is less accurate. But in the case, here, this particular user can't get that information. So it is that the information that's present is the most that they have. It is an interesting use case. It's very distinct from saying, we've got Syft generating an SBOM, you pass it to Grype. This won't be a problem. But if something else is missing certain pieces of information like epoch, you run into these kind of situations for sure.
I think I put a couple links in there for some examples that were kind of crazy with LibreOffice that we were looking at before and Git. The one thing I see is that generally speaking, if I were to take the epoch off of those numbers, it looks like they would still generally reasonably compare, with the caveat that some sort of in the middle maybe don't quite.
Right. Well, and if you look at the very end, if you go to the Git page and scroll to the very bottom, there's some ones that are like have no epoch and are like 4 point something. So I think you might be that. So if you look at, I don't know how these are sorted, but you see like there's like 4.3.20-12 is like under the current version comparison that would compare before everything else on here, because it has no epoch, so the epoch is 0.
Yep.
And like if we add this switch, then I think it would compare after everything on here, because we don't see like any epochs, like 4 after any epochs. And so I think that the concern is that you end up with these like really weird false negatives where this like version of Git from like 1998 or whenever that came out is going to look like it's past the fix for recent CVEs. And that wouldn't be great, but it also might, it would also just be sort of surprising to find somebody running, like the third oldest Git D package that's still available today. That wouldn't be impossible, but it would be surprising. I guess there's 4:7, and so it would be lower than those.
Right, and I think the concern is like the LibreOffice one is, you know, the better example, I think, for the concern that, like, you know, if there's a, I don't know, a 24, and, you know, what we do is we stick 0 as the epoch, all of a sudden it's less than, you know, all of those other ones. And like, clearly it's not that old with all of the things. And I guess my question is like, what would be the ideal solution? And yeah, I sort of go to, you know, some data solution here that says like, you know, oh, these ranges are epoch something, and maybe we could sort of figure out, you know, based on some version range, what the right epoch for the thing is, maybe. But
right, and that's basically what the proposal in that GitHub issue is instead of assuming that the epoch is 0, assume that the epoch matches the vulnerability we're comparing against. And that is an assumption that I'm hopeful would introduce few false negatives. You know, as opposed to many false negatives. You know, hopefully it introduces none, but I think it can theoretically introduce some. But I think it would fix a lot of false positives, because if we assume the epoch is 0 and it's not, so we're just going to say that this package is vulnerable to everything. You know, like if the package is up to epoch 4, there might be 20 years of fixes that this package is missing. So it causes a ton of false positives. So anyway, I think we're going to add option 2 as like a thing you can opt into. Chris has his hand up.
I like option 2 as a thing you could opt into, but
Yeah.
also I wonder if there's a way with the context that we could calculate and show them if they asked, like, what are the potential false negatives that were missed from this, right? Like, hey, we made this assumption, but if this was like epoch was after, right, and we did the comparison wrong, then this is what would show up. And we like, you can like ask, you make a flag, or you tweak a config value, and it's like, okay, you get everything based off the assumption of option 2, and then you go one step further and do a tweak and just say, you know, give me the inverted like mask of everything that would have come back, because that allows them to kind of do their due diligence on, like, at least show their work of what would have potentially been missed if they enabled this.
Yeah, and that's an interesting idea. I wonder, one of my like sort of side projects that I haven't finished is making a Grype output that's easy to pipe into diff, because I think in a lot of ways what you're asking for is like run Grype with the switch on and with the switch off, and see what only comes up with the switch off or with the switch on, whichever way we're thinking of.
Yeah, there's some combination where you can subtract the documents and get the view of like what the riskiest things would be if you could be ignoring.
what if we did something where we matched on those things and ignored them in a way that they were like moved into the ignored section, so that the user could then see both of those things in the case that, you know, that we did.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that, I mean, I think in the future, there's going to be more things that show up in the ignore matches section than what's there today. Just from like, there's a lot of things that we decide to drop. There's a lot of things that we decide are like, they get deduped, thus are implicitly kind of dropped. And there's very few cases of how you make it to the ignore matches section. I think for Grype 1.0, like, we want to think about leveraging that section way more than what we're doing now, and B, making it configurable as to how, like, the user gets a say as to what things land in that section versus not. So to Keith, what you're saying, like, well, you know, we think that this behavior should be opt-inable, and one of those, you know, places on the dial you could put that is, well, maybe it's drop, maybe it's include them, maybe in the middle it's like, I want to put this into the ignore matches section. Yeah, that highly resonates. I think another way that could land, I linked this particular this issue is like hilariously old. We have this,
But it's still
we
a
have
good
this,
idea. Yeah.
yeah, it's one of those that's never been prioritized. I actually wonder if Grype 1.0 is a good time to start thinking about this, because like there's a lot of different ways that we could do this. Yeah, sorry, what is this? So like we have this. It's actually in the code in a lot of places, but we don't really expose it that much. But have a 0 to 1 confidence indication that like, hey, is this like a good match or not? And it would be kind of up to the user to set a threshold of what good is or not good. So you can imagine, like, if the matcher says, well, I was able to make this match, but like the epoch didn't quite line up, or I had to strip it off, or I had to make it match, then like your confidence in that match goes down. And, you know, I think we could argue all day long about like what's the right threshold and what's the right quantitative values, as with any system where you take something that's like not quantifiable and just make it quantifiable. But that being one of the possible mechanisms that you can choose to either A, drop something, or B, put it in the ignore matches section, to Keith, what you're saying. Like this being that decision point, as opposed to it being for every possible a decision a matcher can make it just just this value on a match. Yeah. Like if the match is below 0.6 in confidence, let's ignore it. And somehow the matcher would make that, you get a low confidence in these kinds of matches.
I do also really like this.
Go ahead.
Combined with your previous comment, Alex, about like using this as a mechanism to either bucket it into you're going to see it or it's in the ignored set. Like that makes it really clean, because it also makes sure that all of the matches, independent of their confidence, are in the data and can be handled and processed and viewed however the user would like. It's just what you're going to see in the not ignored section based on that threshold is what you're going to see right, on the screen in the default presentation. I really like that, because there's this underlying thing with vulnerability scanning where some people really would like to see everything that's conceivably a match, because they're very much in the mind of, if it even could be a match, we're going to go and look at it, because we're really focused on making sure we don't have any vulnerabilities. Whereas others are more, we can't look at 1,000 things today. We really need to prioritize the most important things, and so the most confident matches are the ones we need to focus on. It's a very different perspective, but what you're describing, I think, accommodates both ends of that sort of spectrum.
Yeah, I like that. We've talked about sometimes the metaphor of a knob, where you're like, do I want to be lots of false positives but miss nothing, or do I want to be few false positives but maybe some false negatives? And this would be a good mechanism, is to just say, okay, pass -- min severity 0.5 or min confidence 0.5, and then we just ignore matches that we aren't at least. And I don't know, like the fraction is going to be sort of a fiction. It's not like we know a probability or something, but it's a good way to have like a relative score. And so then we could say like, okay, well, we're assuming the package version, so we're going to take 1/10 of a point. Or we're assuming the package epoch, so we're going to take 1/10 of a point. We relied on a CPE, so we're going to take 8/10 of a point, or whatever.
We're going to remove the whole confidence. We relied on the CPE. Good luck. The score goes away.
We're assuming that this package has semvers after it gave up on dates, so we're going to take 2/10 of a point or something. That's an interesting, like, sort of every time Grype has to guess, the confidence goes down.
Yeah. Well, and I want to put forth like doubling back a little bit. So I think some of these are not mutually exclusive. I think this is like, so we haven't designed the Grype 1.0 like config facade for a lot of this, but I think in some cases folks will be comfortable working with the 0 to 1 threshold and kind of guessing a threshold. And I think other folks are going to have more stringent rules saying like, maybe we have a team that like it's all RPMs all the time. They know exactly what they should be seeing in the data, and they know like,
Yep.
I don't want you to ever guess. So like they don't want to be dependent on that. So I think whatever we expose, the user should have the flexibility to say like, oh, I want to ignore things based off of this 0 to 1 threshold. And I think we should also expose into what Keith was saying earlier, like just let in the master configuration, like let it decide at that point whether it gets included or not included for that kind of stuff. Meaning, sorry, it ends up in the matches section or the ignore matches essentially, like automatically based off of configuration without having to think about the threshold. But I feel like both play into it in a way that folks can opt into. Hand waving at all, how that looks like on the CLI and the config, like I think that'll be a fun discussion. I think whenever we do get around to designing that, having it on one of these the gardening sessions here would be great.
Nice. I do want to, if it's okay, like pop back to the reason why this needs discussion, which you'd put explicitly at the top of the actual, the original ticket, about this being an opt-in versus default. I think opt-in sounds right, just because there's ambiguous cases here.
Yeah, I think opt-in sounds right too. It would be, and it's sort of it's not a big change because like most RPMs have epoch 0 and many sources of SBOMs include the epoch. So it's not a huge change either way, right? Because this only affects people where there's a non-zero epoch that's missing, right? If there's a 0 epoch that's missing, that's what we do today.
Yeah.
And if it's not missing, this feature has no effect. So yeah, I think making it opt-in, it's very hard to have the right defaults for everybody.
Yep.
Because different people are, like I want to take a quick look at this node package to see if it's like node malware or has like an obviously old version of some dependency is a different use case than like I'm gonna bake some embedded stuff in a security sensitive environment, right? Like there's just different people are doing very different things with Grype, and there's not going to be one position of this switch that's right for everyone. I think changing the default behavior would be disruptive. I think I'd keep the default how it is. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, me. No, I second. Like, I'll put one more extra thing. There's something about epics that like there's always one extra dimension that I'm like not thinking about if I finally gets to implementing it. So like, for instance, like comparing from the binary package versus the upstream and whether or not there's the assumptions for epoch should match there. So it's like, I'm in favor of not changing the default for purely that reason alone. So we don't have to think about all. I think this should definitely be opt-in because of all the reasons you mentioned, and not changing something around box would be great.
I mean, I guess it was probably said before, but just defaulting to having the fewest false negatives is generally what we want to do, right? So
yeah,
for that reason.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this needed discussion prior to this session. Do you think discussion has been had, State?
I think it's too contentious to change a spec compliant default at this point, and too risky to Alex's point. So I think we'll leave the default. I think the best argument for leaving that the default is that's what, if you install like RPM dev fair comp, it'll default missing epochs to 0.
Right.
And I think saying like by default we're spec compliant, but you can tune the config if you need to, is a reasonable position to take.
Yep.
Yeah, we definitely wrote like this. Like I call this the scroll of the RPM. Like this, all these comments are written because I think like we basically got it wrong like 3 times. So the third time was like we gotta like nail the comments on this one. But yeah, I love not thinking about outbox.
Yeah. It's epic.
This also like Perl Erno is like I was trying to ingest some Alma advisories earlier this week, and I'm pretty sure I saw this exact comparison go wrong in like a dev branch where I'm working with the RPM matcher, like literally these versions. They look familiar. So definitely be careful here.
Yep. Excellent. Okay. Well, yeah. So Will, maybe you can follow up on the ticket, just maybe summarizing what we talked about the default. But it actually seems like you may have already kind of commented on this. So, but we can manage the mischief. Ready to move on?
Yeah, in other news, we're changing the version scheme for how we release Syft. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to a written out date format in ASCII text. Yeah, that's right.
Like a check, yep.
Just incrementing monotonic integer. Every time we release Syft, the number goes up by 1.
If
It's
if everything
forever.
worked that way,
They just get big and
yeah, we'd be great.
yeah. No backporting. It's just a new one. There's just a new one. It just goes up by 1.
That would turn this directory into a much smaller set of code, I think.
Oh yeah. Yes. Like those, like it's all like we very rarely add new version schemes to that directory, but when we do, it's that's any new single comparator that we add usually gets about 50 new test cases just to make certain that we've like covered all those, right? So like each one of those, there's probably hundreds and hundreds of cases here. It's great.
Yeah. This by itself, I think, is just a valuable source of, human knowledge at this point in time. Okay, well, let's go back. See, we've got a couple minutes left. It's maybe 10 minutes. We might have opportunity for a few more. Do you guys want to do another needs discussion? Any in particular, or should I just move on?
What's the Java packages to Java archive metadata? Is that, we done that one before?
Oh, we talked about that one last week. The Java packages
We did.
is to like actual Java packages, not Syft packages. So like com.sun.something, right? Like the package qualifier. It's like the class paths. That's, yeah, it was,
Got it.
takes us a minute to realize.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fun. We come to a conclusion on that one, or is it just out of curiosity? I could watch that.
Well, I think that the gist was that, it might be good to add that stuff, but for the same reason that we don't add all of the Go module paths, that it could result in extremely large SBOMs, we are definitely hesitant to do that for the same reason.
Yeah, there's something to be said that I feel like that there is something that is not an SBOM, or I'll say maybe is another kind of SBOM that is really talking about like binary or I'll say compiled things that I think is missing. So for say if I'm looking at an L file, this would be like capturing symbol-based information. I'm talking about Python, maybe it would be like PYC related stuff. For Java, it would be class files, where it's like it is important to know what is exactly there, but I don't want exactly those files. I still want a description of it. And that I feel like it's a missing thing in the SBOM space because people want these high level descriptions of software packages. But when it comes to like reachability analysis, this kind of information is really valuable, but there's just not a great way to summarize all that kind of stuff because your SBOMs is turned ginormous. So there's something here so if there's any interested parties out there, don't know what this means yet, but.
Mm-hmm. I was trying to look at if it doesn't look like because we did talk about this at some length last week, but I can't see if we responded to let them know what we were going to do next, especially since there's a PR for it.
There's a PR for it, oh yes.
I don't know.
I'm gonna take a look to see what this is about.
Yeah.
But yeah, it
Should we
does
try
sound
to?
like. Go for it.
Oh, go ahead, Alex.
Oh, I mean, I was just saying that, but it sounds like if the conclusion of what we said last time, like this would be too verbose, then like it sounds like it would be a close. I
Well, I don't think we said like hard no to it so much as like if there's a definite concern and it would probably have to be opt-in, et cetera.
Yeah.
I think we may have like gotten to this one at the very end and we didn't actually
Yeah.
come to conclusions, which is why nobody ended up responding to it.
Yeah.
I think it would be nice to have the use case mentioned in the issue is an interesting one. They have a profiler and they're trying to correlate SBOM entries to profiler entries, and I think probably like having like logging or like open telemetry output or something would have a similar use case. So I think it needs to be this is open telemetry profiling. I think it would need to be opt-in because it potentially makes SBOMs when there's a lot of jars huge, and many people don't want a list of what classes are in the jars they're using. They just want, you don't need it for vulnerability matching or whatever. But I'd be open to having it as long as it was like off by default, that you could turn it on.
Yeah, I mean, I think I second this because I mean, the GoVoln data, for instance, they do have symbol-based information, and so in theory, so say just for Syft alone, we were capturing SBOM for like the Syft binary, and we wanted to have that like reachability to be able to say like, no, this GoVoln doesn't actually apply because we didn't pull on it. We don't see any evidence of this particular symbol. That would be pretty valuable. So like, there's that space. I think there's another one that came across. I guess what I'm trying to say is there's probably a few catalogers where 2 or 3 where this would be useful. So like maybe we start with a per cataloger switch, like there's one for the Java, maybe one for Go, and one for the other one I can't think of.
Python, I think was one that's starting to include some of that information in the vol data. I believe Weston mentioned that.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy. I mean, maybe there's a top level switch here. Is like the extra point I was trying to get to. I don't know what that's like. What is that switch?
Yeah, I don't know, like
Yeah.
symbols or something, right? Like language symbols.
It's almost, I mean, symbols the most correct phrase. I do not have a better suggestion.
The Java one is actually weirdly like a directory structure more than anything else. It's almost like if Syft captured the entire directory structure, including archives that it expanded, then that would have exactly the information that we're looking for.
I still think you'd have to reconstruct it though, right? You'd have to know like, okay, in Java, like Java is using directories to deduplicate symbols and to namespace and deduplicate symbols, right? Like, I think that like in principle, I think Civ should opt in to putting like symbol names, whatever that means for the language you're working at, on packages. Like maybe we could ask the Go binary, like what exported functions were linked in here or something. I don't know.
Right. Well, I'm just kind of asking, like, what is the name? I mean, we can always name it later, but I didn't know if anybody had a good suggestion off the top of the head of what this agnostically kind of is. Because yeah, it's kind of symbols. It's kind of something else. It's not quite debug symbols.
It's like related to, like you said, the reachability analysis, though, right? Like
Could be.
And maybe
Function
it's
level
like
symbols or function level.
right.
Function level
And
evidence.
maybe it's like language specific metadata is almost what it is, right? Like
Or language
But-
modules, maybe? I definitely think packages is overloaded because that's what actually tripped us up on the first conversation last time. We thought it took us a couple minutes to figure out, oh, they're talking Java packages. That's like that concept.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So something other than packages. I wonder if language modules, I don't know. Actually, it's a good question, Alex. I don't know what a good term would be.
Yeah, well, I mean, okay, so it sounds like the PR, we should review it, but it sounds like we think there's a path forward if it's a opt-in cataloger specific configuration. And then B, maybe we think this can be added to other catalogers. And then C, maybe there's a higher level switch we could add that like orchestrates them all together.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is fun.
Yep. Yep.
Oh, thanks for taking me back down memory lane from last week. So.
Yeah. No, it was a really interesting one for sure. There was also part of the discussion was about potentially even rolling some of that stuff up because there's some structure and whether and how to, expose that. Yeah, but I think, this one I feel like definitely would like to respond, let the user know we're keeping an eye on it and are engaged. Yeah.
That might be just worth posting and saying, like, we discussed this at a couple of recent live streams and we're open to moving forward, but we want it to be opt-in because of space concerns.
Yeah.
And we're curious about the best way to represent it.
Yeah.
And it sounds like this user already
Yep.
is proposing that this be opt-in. So
Yep.
that's pretty good.
Nice.
I could probably respond to this one. I'll review the PR first before I respond though.
Yeah.
I would just respond like, I don't know. I mean, do what you need to, but we've talked about it twice. We might as well tell them.
Sure. I'll do a pithy response first and a follow up.
So the question is, since we have 2.5 minutes, would you guys like to click on one more of these? Or kind of call it a little, I don't know if any of these are 2.5 minute.
Yeah.
What about the multi-source one? We could do that in 2 minutes, right, Keith?
Yeah, we'll probably just implement it in the whole 2 minutes.
Yeah, so it's only been open for 2.5 years. It's
Yeah.
simple fix.
I'm kidding, Dan. I would vote call it unless you think, oh, what's this one? To support other mount spaces. Well, now you've nerve sniped me.
This is the like.
It's got the cap add sysadmin. I thought
Yeah, so this comes up periodically. Basically, Syft tries to avoid like reading from dev random forever or trying to open dev null or whatever. Like we try to avoid thinking that there are packages under /proc, right? There's all these special like pseudo file systems that we try to not read from because they're not really places that you find installed packages.
Yeah, this is a longer discussion for sure.
Yeah, and then we always finds out somebody's keeping packages there. Sorry, go ahead.
Are they just asking to expose configurations so they can control it? Because that's totally reasonable. It's currently not exposed.
Yeah. Oh, that's not a bad idea. Like ignored mount types or something. I think.
Well, if memory serves, the problem is that they have something mounted in one of these directories, like from one of those runtime systems, right? And so they want to scan that, but it doesn't work because the entire directory structure that they're trying to scan is in one of those ignored things. And like, if all we could do is just like ignore that first part of the thing you directly scanned from the ignored list, like that would help them.
Yeah.
I see. So it's like, okay, so it's not only like the controlling what is going to be included in them as mount spaces, but it's also like a more granular control over indexing within more granular control over like what gets included versus excluded.
Yeah, and I think the general ask is like, don't ignore an explicitly selected target based on the mount type. Should probably be default behavior. Like if you decided to scan, like if you unpacked an image at /temp/foo and we're like, well, we don't scan tempfs, that we're wrong because you specifically asked us to scan that. And that's what they're doing here, right? They're scanning a file under
proc,
like proc root something, and we don't scan procfs because is mostly information about running packages or running processes, and it doesn't have packages in it.
Right.
But I guess in this case, there are packages in it.
I mean, okay, so this will,
So, yep.
like, we could go the direction of saying, like, I feel like what you're saying is a little too implicit, meaning like, I wouldn't know why Syft is including it in some circumstances and excluding it in other circumstances, other than I pointed it at different spots. And, but I think I'm still, that this particular case that's being talked about is, I feel like they're really saying, well, like, I want control to be able to say, like, yes, don't skip these things.
We could also say that the file target, like if you do Syft file colon, like that's an exact path to a file. We
Right,
should
I agree
read
with
that
that.
file. And if we can't, we should fail. Because
I agree
it's
with
not
that.
even, we're not even gonna like get stuck in I guess we could get in a symlink loop. I don't know how we should deal with dereferencing, but
Yeah,
if it's a
tricky.
real path and we can read from it,
We handled this symlink loops just fine, even in that case. I agree with the file case, because you're right, we're optimizing indexing in most of these cases.
Yep.
And we don't index, we index a single file, like, yay. So, I'm kind of going back and forth internally to my comment on would people find it surprising if Syft behaved one way versus another, depending on what you pointed it at? But I do wholeheartedly agree with the file case. Like, it's like, yeah, we should just scan that.
Maybe that's
So.
a good follow-up. We're a little over, so I did want to, my fault for clicking out. Thank you guys for tuning in, but I think it's probably time to call it for today. Just wanted to thank everybody for joining us, and we'll definitely see you next week and see you online.
Yeah.
Sounds good?
Indeed.
all right.
All right. Thanks
All
all.
right.
Take care.
Thanks.
Sure, folks.